This is the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The archives.
Episode 177. Should we do more to price in externalities?
Welcome to the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie, and today we're looking at externalities, factors that cost you or benefit you, for which you make no contribution or for which you bear no blame. Can we cost more of these externalities, and should we, so that the rightful recipients receive the money or pay the money? If a new railway station pushes up your house price, should you see all the benefits? If a new airport pushes the price down, should you get compensation? And what about public services? If you use them, should you pay more? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. Well, on the face of it, public goods are a good thing. We all need roads to get around, so it makes sense that the government builds and maintains them. A village green looks a lot nicer than selling off the centre of a community to a developer. And, you know, what's England if you can't sit down, having a pint, watching a game of cricket, rather than looking at a block of flats? But how far do you go with public goods? If you had a public field, for example, it could be overrun if we allowed people to allow any cattle to graze in it. If everyone's cattle grazed in it, we know the field would turn to mush. We know roads are overrun because we offer no charge to use them. Seas are overfished without quotas. In private hands, we are concerned about the sustainability of our assets. If they're public, well, they're open to abuse because everyone wants what they can get out of it right now. Isn't that the problem, Steve?
Yeah, well, that's actually one of the classic papers in economics is a paper called The Tragedy of the Commons, which raises the issue you're talking about and says basically if you have a resource which is publicly owned, then everybody has a private motivation to overuse it, and therefore it'll be degraded and it'll collapse. And when you look at a historical argument, it's completely wrong, because if you go back and take a look at periods where there were commons, the society itself had its own rules. It wasn't if anybody was over farming a common area, then they were very promptly pulled off it. So there was a social control over those public areas, which a capitalist economy, or rather somebody coming from a completely private market-oriented perspective of how society could function, can't understand, because as far as they're concerned, unless there are ownership rights, there can be no other form of control. But there were in those societies quite strong forms of control. So as a commentary on pre-capitalist commons, it was a very poor argument.
Well, I can give a much more recent example of that. If anyone's been to Cooper Pedy in Australia, which is on the long road from Adelaide up to Darwin, and I don't think there's any regulations, or historically there were no regulations there. Anybody could go and mine. You just dug a hole in the ground. The danger was that I think there was one rule, that was you couldn't mine within so many meters of the road. Other than that, go for your life. And I think the control, because I asked someone about it, was pretty much that just don't go, too close to your neighbour. And if you do, you'll have a bit of a Barney. And if it's not resolved, then you'll probably get your head kicked in. And that was pretty much the control they had. Somehow they managed to manage it. I'm sure the biggest and toughest blokes won at the end of the day. So maybe it's not the best model, but it they didn't overmine.
But then you also get the small group guys getting together and five small blokes against one thug, big thug.
I think we just described the outback of Australia pretty well, haven't we?
Yeah, that's maybe even Australian Parliament. But that's the level of social control that existed in those pre-capitalist societies. I mean, your Cooper Pedy example is one of building up, even when people are there just to dig stuff out of the ground and flog it. They still develop a society which imposes controls. So I think the tragedy of the commons argument was false when you applied it as a historical argument in favour of what was effectively the enclosure movement that got rid of all those common lands and turned them into private ownership, which is a large part of the formation of English capitalism. But I think it's an extremely valid argument when you apply it to what's happening on the economy, on the interaction of the economy with the ecology overall.
Yeah.
We have treated the ocean as a place where we can all dump, because nobody is saying you're dumping stuff on my piece of water as opposed to land. We have over-farmed the fish stocks that exist there. So we have the cod wars, the classic collapse in cod population. And we are treating the planet as a commons, and we are degrading it. And but at the same time, the whole idea that you can have ownership of the air or ownership of the water just doesn't make sense, because, of course, things on water float. And, the fact that we're dumping, you could have all the controls you like, but who's going to own the Sargasso Sea and charge us for how are they going to charge us for dropping a plastic bottle top in the Thames when it ends up in the Sargasso Sea? The price mechanism doesn't work.
But you can price more than we are doing, though, can't you? So if we look at
you can
road pricing is an obvious example. If I use my car more, why shouldn't I pay more? Because in a way, that is a public good that's provided that gets overused. The more roads we build, the more it fills with cars. The more cars there are. And then
you get the income distribution problem, which of course Macron exposed dramatically. What was it last year now, when he decided to put up oil prices for that reason? Fundamentally, it was an ecologically argued tax that we should tax diesel.
Kicked off all the riots. Yeah,
it kicked the riots, because at that stage, and as I love an expression by one of the Gilets jaunes on this front, they said that they're worried about the end of the world. I'm worried about the end of the month. And the reason being, because with the incomes being as low as they are and as fragile, and the cost of transportation, you're not driving for the sheer pleasure of being on the road. You're driving to get to work. And suddenly you find that the increased price of using that common resource with the per capita or per mileage usage fee means that you can't, when your cost of getting to work means the wage you bring back doesn't cover your cost of living anymore, and bang, you'd rather go on a riot than
that's because he did one thing without the other. I mean, you could quite easily, you could introduce road pricing where the more you drive, and if you're driving a heavy goods vehicle, the more you pay because you're causing more damage to the road. That means your business will incur more costs, or people will pay more to get to work. But if you just have to say, well, okay, we'll fix that by people on lower incomes. We will give them more benefits or less tax. What we push with one hand, we'll take away with the other hand, and the people who are really paying will be the heavy users. And if and if they're damaging the environment, they should be paying more for it.
Yeah, but the whole idea that you can actually price into a level of environmental damage, and that's the main issue we're talking about here, I think. And this is the neoclassical fantasy, again, that we can solve everything using the price mechanism. So if you look at
it's not just the environment, I'm talking about getting the asset, the road asset, where people are paying for it based on their usage of it. And I'm just wondering whether, because otherwise with a public good, you could always just say, well, we're just going to pay and everyone gets equal access, and you all pay into it, whether using it or not. And we've got this feeling now, haven't we, that it should be a bit more user pays. I'm not saying it's necessarily the right approach, but you can do it in places.
Yeah, I think that can actually be lead to social dysfunction rather than social function, I think, because one of the arguments in favour of public transport, for example, is that it's actually not the individual user who's benefiting out of the transport. It's the company that the person is going to work for that is getting that benefit in the long term. It's very hard to bring it down to why is somebody travelling? Are they travelling for the fun of travelling, or are they travelling because they've got to go and work? 90% of the time, it's the latter answer. If it was just if everything was individual, if your travel was for your individual needs, then individual pricing makes sense. But if your travel's because you literally have to travel to go and work, and then you have a wage which means you can't afford to pay the cost of the travel to get to work, then you get a breakdown. So a mistake is to see everything in terms of individual paying for services received by the individual.
Right, but doesn't it get passed on? So if I'm a company in London and everyone who works for my company has to pay £35 a day, which is how much it costs from Farnham into London at peak time, then you're going to demand more from your employer. You're going to say, look, it's costing me thousands of pounds a year to try and get into this job. You've got to pay me thousands of pounds more, unless you want to move to Leeds.
Which doesn't happen. So it's an argument saying, let's provide a form of transportation which is publicly charged. We all pay for it publicly, and minimize. So rather than having individuals executing mass transport, have the society executing mass transport. And there are strong arguments in favour of saying there are some services which should be provided at the state level and not paid by the individual, but paid by the taxation systems or by the monetary creation capabilities of the state. One when you put it down on the individual, then it only works if the income distribution is okay. And I don't think even a neoclassical economist would argue at the moment the income distribution is fine as it is.
So, in this user pays approach, I mean, one example is in Australia, which is a crazy example, isn't it, where private schools get government money because state schools get public money. And the argument there is, look, I pay my taxes. I choose to send my kids to a private school. Why shouldn't the government subsidise me? And rather than everyone in the UK, no government money goes to private schools whatsoever. It's states. It all goes to state schools because that is the public good. Yet Australia's got this history where this idea that, I pay, therefore I should benefit. The opposite almost of a public good.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, again, and like in the case of education, one thing which I find dispiriting is the extent to which privatising education has meant that people who would otherwise mix and get to know that somebody who's comes from Pakistan, ends up being your best mate. Even though you're from the white tribe in that part of England, that breakdown, that metal of the formation of weak bonds doesn't happen anymore because you're going to separate schools, and then bang, you meet on the streets later, and it's riot and fight rather than social cohesion. So there are many areas in which the whole idea of pricing and privatising everything leads more to social breakdown than it does to the nirvana of a properly priced economy.
Which is that priced economy is the approach we certainly are following with education, isn't it? The argument that education enables us to get a better job than if we had no education, so we should get a loan and then we should pay back that loan because we are going to reap the rewards.
Yeah, and then this is something which is taken in isolation from everything else. That argument that the individual benefits, therefore the individual pays. Of course, it's ignoring the fact that if a person becomes a doctor, you might have your leg doesn't get you hang onto your leg after an operation rather than losing it. It's a public benefit, and what you get again, the one way in which I will admit the sense in the neoclassical argument about public versus private goods is that if you do have a good where there's benefit that goes beyond the individual who receives it, then it'll be undersupplied. And if you just leave it to the individual, and that applies to education, it applies to transport, it applies to health. There are so many areas where we benefit from what is also a benefit for the individual, the rest of society benefits as well, or what is a benefit for society becomes a cost for the rest of the world. That is a realistic issue in a market economy. We have to find a solution for it. And the solution is not just to make everything priced, which is the neoclassical fantasy.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to say that thing is better off if it's free for the individual.
But what about when it is a cost, though? So let's say, for example, I drink too much alcohol, I get drunk, I urinate on the way home, and that's going to be cleaned up. I might get into a fight and the police get involved. All of these are costs because I drink too much. So do you answer that? Do you say, well, okay, there's got to be some sort of, if there was a mechanism to say, well, okay, we're going to put a quota on how much you can drink, or we're going to charge you proportionally more based on the number of drinks you have per night. If there was a way of pricing it in, should you do something like that where the societal cost is greater as a result of your actions?
I'm still trying to get over the vivid image of you drinking too much and urinating on the way home.
Come on, we've all done it.
Oh, yeah.
Not for a long time, I hasten to add. But I mean, but you know what I'm saying. There's things like that. Or people who, and this is a bit more contentious, people who eat too much. And I appreciate there's a lot of people who are overweight because of medical conditions, and also, you don't know their background, which can have driven them that way. But you a neoclassic economist who's trying to charge for everything, price everything, should say, well, okay, you should have a tax based on your surplus calorie intake each day.
Well, that's also the case with smoking, for example. That's
another great example.
The reason why cigarettes cost as much as they do is not the cost of production of cigarettes, but the taxation imposed is to try to discourage people consuming it. So there are elements where, yes, you do want to make something more expensive because of the impact of individual behaviour on the remainder. And in those cases, the social controls we often come down to are legislative. So, for example, you drive without a seatbelt, you are going to get fined if you're seen not having the seatbelt on. Pricing it on that basis after the event is just not going to work. So you have to, you have to have legislative controls on that sort of behaviour. But often, in terms of cigarettes consumption, one of the mechanisms we tried is to make it more expensive. It hasn't been all that effective in stopping smoking, but it certainly has played a role.
I'm moving house. I'm buying a house, and we're going to do it up. I spoke to my new neighbour the other week, who said it's going to be nice that someone else is doing their house up in the street, because the better the street, the more everyone's property value goes up. I should have asked him to chip in on the cost of doing up my house, because he's going to benefit from it.
Well, this is the Henry George argument about land. That the reason you should be taxing land as a source of taxation revenue rather than other forms of taxation is that's one of the classic instances where you benefit from what other people do. And the increase in the capital gain you get comes out of not of your work, but of somebody else's. So you shouldn't be the only recipient of the capital gain.
So a guy called Ronald Coase, I don't know if the problem of social cost. He wrote this back in 1960. He is an interesting quandary. That you've got a railway that emits sparks that could burn a farmer's crops down. Have you heard this?
Yep.
The question is, who pays for it? If it costs $1,000 to control the sparks, and the lost crops are worth $2,000, who should pay?
Yeah.
And even if the law sides with the railway, the farmer's still going to say to the railway company, look, I'm going to pay you to control the sparks, because that's going to be cheaper than the $2,000 worth of crops that I'm going to lose.
Yeah. So there are points in which the benefit and the cost aren't entirely located in the individual purchaser, whereas the model of economics we have just looks is so. If it is applicable at all, it's a situation in which the purchase and the cost and the benefits are incurred by the person paying and don't affect anybody else. That's Maggie Thatcher's "There's no such thing as society," but of course there is. So. We have to cope with it. We can't bring everything down to the price mechanism, everything down to ownership.
But this is trying to relate it all to a price mechanism, isn't it?
I know,
Someone else is causing damage for somebody else. Should they pay for it? Just as I'm, in my argument, I was saying, well, I'm actually going to help somebody else. Should they pay me? But on that, that flips the other way, of course, with that railway. If the solution cost $2,000 to stop the sparks and the crops are only worth $1,000, then the railway company would pay the farmer $1,000 to continue sparking and burning his crops.
Yeah, I mean, these things, ultimately, these are textbook examples that don't work in the real world. And we're getting a classic instance of that right now in California with the PGA, the power authority in California, which is a privatized institution, is being blamed for the scale of the fires that are occurring in California right now. Not solely because the major cause behind them, the severity of the fires, is just how much drier the part of the world is now, courtesy of increased winds due to global warming, but they're now shutting down power access to millions of people at a time because literally of sparks. And you think there's no way the price mechanism solves this. And in fact, having a privately owned company which was underdoing maintenance, has been accused of underdoing maintenance, I better say, for the last 20 or 30 years to increase its profits. That behaviour of shifting the costs forward into the future will terribly, sorry to say, the future ultimately arrives, and people are now saying we want to bring this private institution back into public ownership and make sure that in future it does proper maintenance, so you don't get as many of their power substations sparking and causing bushfires.
Well, I guess if you're starting to price everything, you have to price absolutely everything.
And it becomes impossible. You simply have to set standards ultimately. And this is the fact that the textbook way of looking at the world is inadequate. The world is not as simple as a textbook, thank God. In that more complex world, you have to have a mechanism other than just the textbook mechanism of a price system.
And it is the complexity, isn't it? Because I was thinking you were talking about smoking in bars. For example, if you had two bars right next to each other and one of them allowed smokers in and the other one didn't, I would go into the one that didn't allow the smokers. But then if they were to say, well, we're going to charge you twice as much for a beer in here, I'd be thinking, well, it's healthier, but am I prepared to pay twice as much for a beer because, at least if I get ill, I've got the NHS to help pay, so I'll take the cheaper beer for now, unless the NHS didn't exist, and then that would influence my decision as well. I'll go, I might get cancer that is going to cost an absolute fortune or other medical complications that I simply can't afford, so I'll pay more now to avoid the smokers.
Yeah, I mean, again, it just that sort of example shows how crazy it is to go on the whole idea of price. The price mechanism is the only way to solve all the problems of a society. There is certainly an argument in favour of some pricing to reflect public costs for private benefits, but ultimately you have to realise you have a society as well and impose some controls, some rules in that society too. So, for example, the blanket ban on smoking in restaurants. In the whole of Australia is one of the first countries to do it. Yeah. Simon Chapman, an old friend of mine, was a major campaigner behind that. Congratulations, Simon, on a brilliant campaign. By the way, the reason Australia was so successful in reducing smoking faster than the rest of the world, was one of Simon's ideas for a campaign, and that was all the imagery. And you'll see it on cigarette packs. You see lungs cut open and all this awful stuff that happens out of smoking. His campaign was, kiss a non-smoker, enjoy the difference. And it had two people kissing a strawberry as the image. And that was a very effective way of reducing smoking overall.
Right, but if you're a smoker yourself, you perhaps don't notice it. That's the.
I tested the theory; did in fact work.
Oh, did it? How many people did you have to kiss for that to happen?
I needed a large sample.
So I think what we're saying in all of this then is that pricing really doesn't work. Regulation does, and maybe
a combination of the two. I think you simply, again, the neoclassical thing is always to get rid of regulation, just have pricing mechanism.
Right. But pricing for negative benefits rather than positive benefits. You
need a couple of you have to recognise.
I'm not going to be able to ask my next door neighbour to pay me for the house because of the benefits I'm going to create. No. And in the example of that, building a railway line where all of a sudden new stations open, you can't go charging all the owners for the houses they've already bought.
Well, in that sort of situation, you can potentially do that, like the Elizabeth line. Is that the name of the new line opening up in London?
Eventually.
Very, very slowly?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the elements of that is to say you would tax the capital appreciation caused by the increase in house prices near the stations than the Elizabeth line. So that sort of thing, pardon me, can be done. It's one of the ideas of the Georgist ideas about how to stop people getting a private benefit out of a public good.
Right.
They make plenty of sense.
All right. Okay. Well, there are individual examples. You're coughing so much, by the way, because you've been kissing all of these smokers.
I have. That's right. Well, I did stop the research some time ago, but these things have time lags.
It does. It takes a while. So, okay. So finally, then, just how this obviously relates to the climate. So, because the whole, I know you're not a big fan of pricing in carbon emissions.
No, I mean, partly because I'm a neoclassical economist by having that fantasy, first of all, that you could do anything to pricing mechanism, but more importantly, the fantasy that a 4-degree increase in global temperature will only reduce GDP by 4%. And then they're wondering why politicians haven't done anything about it. We've delayed by 2 generations of humans our response to climate change, and there's no way the price mechanism is going to do it. You couldn't put the price up enough to have people innovate and make enough non-carbon based power systems to reduce the carbon dioxide load on the planet.
Why? I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is that the model...
It'd bankrupt everybody.
Right.
The price you'd need would be a couple of $1,000s per tonne minimum, and then at that point, bank capitalism comes to a screeching halt. We've got to the stage where it won't be the market mechanism that gets through us. If we get through it, it'll be quite possibly militaristic control coming our way. So I think the fantasy that the price system can solve everything is not the only reason. The main reason, I think, is the nonsense they've written about the trivialization they've done of the cost of climate change. So they've drastically understated the costs. But the whole idea you could do it with the price mechanism as well would have been true 50 years ago. By delaying us for 50 years, there's no way the price mechanism will achieve the change that's necessary now.
So given that it is a complex, all of this is a complex system, economics is the globe is a complex system. The idea that you price in some public goods, trying to put a price back and trying to recuperate the cost, is that just a nonsense then? Because there's always side effects and repercussions.
Yeah, well, you have to look at the side effects and repercussions. And on that front, I recommend, I've actually said if I can put it up on the Patreon website, but there's a very short talk by Jay Forrester and by another one of Sturman as well, where they explain that the sort of linear thinking that people get caught up in, there's cause and effect. And you have, here's the cause, here's the effect, how do we change the cause and minimize it? Sees that as an isolated problem, but everything in a complex society is linked to everything else. And you have to have a systemic way of thinking about that, which is what system dynamics attempted to provide. And so the trouble is, again, it isn't just even the focus on the price mechanism. It's seeing all these things as isolated from each other when they are systemically interconnected. And in that world, you need much more than just a single mechanism.
And there's some things you can't just put a price on, obviously. So in the introduction, I mean, there's nothing more quintessentially English than sitting on a village green watching a game of cricket. And yet that land is right in the centre of a village, ripe for developers to stick an apartment block in, even though it would destroy the village. But we don't allow that to happen.
Yeah, and the village. I was actually back in Australia involved in a similar battle over land around the Cooks River, which we lost, by the way, the local council in terms of losing part of the land for a sporting complex. But that way in which community would come together to defend those common elements is quite remarkable. And I think, again, that's one area where leave the price mechanism out of it. That's something which people are better to solve at a social level. You know how important it is to have that. And if you that common land, and if you have the thought of the land is going to become a bunch of 15-story high rises, or you go and fight to maintain it as a cricket field, the public turns up and fights for the cricket field.
Yeah, and they would. And I live in a town where you can't buy fast food because the town council has, for a long time, well, since fast food emerged, have said we do not want any fast food outlets. It's not very healthy, and everyone is really happy with that decision.
Yeah. There's some things you keep out of the market mechanism. So, we don't just live in a market economy. We live in a complex society with the market as a major part of that. And the neoclassical thing is always push everything into the market. There are some things which work better when you actually do it in a collective sense, and we have to get the balance right. And you get to realize that there is such a thing as a spectrum, rather than saying everything has to be pushed to the end of the price mechanism. Yeah,
and I guess the reason why I wanted to hold this conversation was because we are in a position where we can price more because of technology. We could, for example, see where you are, where you're going, how far you've driven. We could track all of that. We've got cameras every bloody where now, even if we didn't have any tracking mechanism in your car. But I guess and that will be very tempting for economists, won't it? The fact that we could price everything. But the fact that we could doesn't mean we should.
But there you can say who's actually doing it. You can't say why they're doing it. And if you have somebody going off to, go have a drink at a pub, okay, that's the personal benefit, personal cost should be imposed. If they're going off to work, it's a different story. And that particular thing, again, the price mechanism to do everything becomes an incredibly complicated mess. And sometimes you have to say, what is the best means to provide this in a collective level, say, as in, for example, public transport, or is the best way to do it totally private, which, in terms of alcohol consumption and paying for alcohol, you never want to have publicly subsidized alcohol. So there are areas where you have to make a relatively intelligent decision as to whether something is better provided at a public level or a private.
And if we get too detailed, we get lost in the detail and we lose the big picture. That's ultimately it, isn't it? All right, very good. We will leave it there. Interesting discussion as always. Good to talk, Steve.
Good day, mate.
So maybe the answer of keep it simple, stupid is the solution to all of this. Although next week we're going to look at maybe the opposite, economic complexity. We're going to look at how you can tell the potential growth for a particular part of the world based on the complexity of the economy and its ability to bring together many different industries to grow exports. We'll look at that next time on the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. I'll see you then. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.